am Itamar Moses, and I'm on my way to interview AR Pete Gurney. The way that people tend to describe Gurney's work is that he's sort of a chronicler of the upper middle class WASP lifestyle, but I think that's awfully reductive. It's true that he tends to write about a particular social echelon or cultural background because it's his, but the stuff he writes about is actually the most, I think, sort of fundamental, emotionally wrenching stuff. And he writes about that stuff in a way that's really simple and elegant and truthful and powerful, but understated, so it's deceptive. It seems like he's constantly challenging himself to do something different than he did before, which is not what people tend to say about him, but it's the truth. That's something that I always really admire in writers when I see it, and it's something that seems to end up happening in my own work. So I'm looking forward to talking to him.
Come on in, Itamar.
Hey.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Oh, hey.
This is Bill.
Hey, Bill.
I hope you like dogs.
I do. I love dogs.
Okay, and here's where I work when I'm in town.
This is where the magic happens?
Yeah, what you could call it my study.
Fantastic. Trophies of triumphs past.
Triumphs or failures.
So you work at this desk.
I work at this desk with a computer primarily, and there's the printer next to it.
Do you play music? Do you listen to music when you write? Or
No.
Me
Do
either.
you?
No, I find it too distracting.
Yeah,
I'm transported by it. And how do you resist the temptations of the internet?
well, sometimes I don't resist. How about you?
Yeah, no, it's impossible. I have to check my email every half an hour.
But is that, yeah, I do that too. But I must say that the computer has really liberated me in a basic way because...
Yeah, because when you were first writing, people were still chiseling on tablets.
That's right, you're right. And I couldn't write anything unless I had a pen with liquid ink so I could hear the scratch of the pen. What I did was, I decided I'd had to learn margins and everything, so I started writing these letters on the computer. And that suddenly turned into a play called Love Letter.
Oh, wow. So Love Letters was your apprentice play for learning how to write on a computer.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
It was a farewell to the scratch of the pen. It's about writing. It's about writing letters, not email.
What is your writing schedule? What's your schedule?
I'm very bourgeois. I'm at my desk normally by, say, 9 o'clock at the latest in the morning, and I take a break for lunch, normally when I walk my dog, and I come back and write totally discardable stuff after lunch.
Yeah, isn't that, yeah.
Do you do the same thing?
Pretty much. So then the question that always sort of begs for me is those hours exist, so is the best use of them discardable writing, or how have you found to use those hours when the writing is going badly most productively?
There's another use. You can take a nap, and I discovered that's my way. And a nap is great. We're talking about 15 minutes, and that just sort of reawakens you, not necessarily to write, but to read interesting stuff. But otherwise, yeah, I think even though that stuff might be junk that you're writing after lunch, maybe there'll be one phrase, one idea that won't be perfect or right then, but when you get back at it the next day, that'll come into focus in a nice way.
Right, maybe in the afternoon you're building scaffolding.
That could be it.
And then
it's sort of rough and ungainly scaffolding,
yeah.
But it's holding something up. That's a very good image.
Yeah. The conceit of this one is you have two different actors playing
the same part. It wasn't very popular with the critics. We ran because Mary Tyler Moore and Lynn Redgrave were both big draws, and so we ran for about 6 months. It's one of my few excursions to Broadway. I haven't had much luck there and didn't have ultimate luck on this, but everybody thought it was going to be a big hit.
Well, I think it's a brilliant conceit. I mean, anytime you see someone, anytime you you see something that someone hasn't tried before, really, and then usually the sign of a good idea is envy that I didn't think of it, and I'm envious I didn't think of that. So
well,
that means it's a good idea.
You can still use it, and I hope you do, and I bet you'll use it better than I did, because the critics all thought I was doing.
What do they know?
The psychological thing. Oh, she's the deep one, she's the shallow one,
right.
Whatever.
So let's talk about love letters a little bit.
Okay.
It's certainly one of your most well-known plays.
I think so.
And it seems like it was a series of not a series of accidents exactly, but a series of not quite intended consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Like said.
You were just talking about writing it. You weren't even writing it as a play.
No.
You were writing it to practice using the computer. Then you didn't think it was a play. Then you were like, maybe it is a play.
I had to give a talk at the New York Public Library. Mm-hmm. And they had suddenly assigned the topic, which was the wasps at dinner. And I said, I'm not going to do that, because I'd written this play called The Dining Room. I said, I'm tired of all that stereotyping. And I said, I've got a new play, and I would like to read that to the audience. I got a call from the New York Public Library. Said, we really don't like this idea. You got to talk about wasps.
That's how you knew it was brilliant.
Yeah, right.
Nobody liked the idea.
And I said, I won't do it. You're stuck with this. So we read what we made into the first act. Everybody, primarily women, got up and left. I said, oh, it doesn't work, Helen. And it was primary, these women going, because they thought the speech would be over at 5, calling their husbands or their babysitters or their au pairs or whatever, saying we're going to stay because I told them there was a second act. So they all came back, and I knew we had something.
A lot of the things that I try to do on purpose end up hitting a dead end, and then often it's that it's a process a lot of the time of taking it, recognizing and taking advantage of the unintended consequences of happening accidents.
Right, but it's how to recognize it and go with it.
Right.
That's one of the big secrets.
Yeah. Not anymore. Now we told you all.
This is at the Circle Rep, which we were still going. You have your plays done. As we were opening, the star, Julie Bovasso, we had to ultimately let her go. She was not learning her lines, and she had a slight alcohol problem. So we let her go, and she's dead now, so I think we can say this.
We'll leave it in.
Yeah, right. My friend David Traynor, who directed The Dining Room, came in. He said, I'll direct it, but you can't put my name on it. So we opened it without a director. And opening night, 2 things happened. A man had a heart attack in the second row, and the toilet in the men's room overflowed. So we opened, you can imagine the
with a replaced star, no director.
I mean, we were just loaded for bear. But it's over the years, it's gained a certain kind of life.
This is a play that goes all over the place. I mean, it's not like all over the world, but all over this one sort of summer resorts, where people are spending the summer area. And it moves sort of effortlessly from location to location because it manages to sort of sanctify the ritual space, like the theatrical space, in a way that tells us, okay, these are the rules. And these people are in the car, and these people are down on the beach, and now we're up at this house, and now we're at this restaurant, and but with nothing.
Well, John Lee Beatty did the set, and he's a wonderful designer, and the heart of the matter was this hanging couch, which a 2-seater, which could become a car, so the person sitting in back would just stand up behind. It could become a couch. It could become 2 chairs at a table.
Right.
And once you had that fluid couch, you could go anywhere.
And once the audience knows the rules, and then it's fun to, So what was the genesis of the dining room?
We had gotten rid of our dining room in just the way I got rid of the pen and when I did we had gotten rid of our dining room because of the energy crisis in the late 70s. And I suddenly thought, as Alec Guinness said with the bridge on the river, what have I done? I mean, our family life changed very considerably. So I started writing a play about a family, and I suddenly said, I don't want to talk about one family. Why does it have to be one family? And then one thing led to another.
Here's something I wanted to ask when I read it. Were all of those scenes written for the dining room, or were any of the parts of that play sort of scraps and fragments you had elsewhere that you...
No, it was just one thing. What would take place in the dining room at 4 in the afternoon, at 3 in the afternoon, you know, at noon, and you get children's birthday parties and stuff like that.
Interesting. That's not the answer I was hoping for, because I was hoping to have hope for fragments I've discarded that I could someday incorporate them into something.
That happened with another play, with an earlier play, which is a kind of a play called Scenes from American Life. I don't know if you know that play, but that was my first successful play in New York, and that was scraps and scenes, which I suddenly tried to make coherent.
Because certain things, I mean, what you want is to feel that the feeling you have in your, in your belly. Oh, this feels real. This feels truthful. Yeah. This has energy. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, that's something that sustains over the course of a full-length play. But sometimes, here's a scrap that's 4 minutes long. That feels very truthful and potent. I'm not going to invite people into the theater for 4 minutes. What am I going to do with this?
You got to find a way of putting it in.
So you have to stitch it to something.
Good for you. I assume you're doing that or have done that.
I don't know. Well, Love Stories is an example of.
Exactly.
Those were self-contained
they were longer.
plays.
Each was 10 or 15.
Yeah, 10 to 15 minutes. But putting them all together into 90 minutes was my way of actually turning it into an event.
It was well done.
Well, thank you, sir. Although this is about you. Please, enough. We'll cut that out too. And here's a star that commemorates Sylvia. Maybe that's an opportunity to talk about the play in which you anthropomorphized a dog.
Got that right. I anthropomorphized it all right.
into a person. Where did that idea come from?
I don't know whether you feel the same way, but it seems to me the successful plays I've written, and not that many have been totally successful, have come out of strong feelings. I was up in the country, and my wife works a lot, so she was in New York, and I was lonely, and I saw an ad in the paper for a dog. And I went up to look at the dog. It was a black lab, and I brought the dog home.
So the opening scene of the play where he brings the dog home without having consulted with his wife is completely autobiographical.
That's right. And when my wife came out, she said, "What is that?" And it was a puppy, really, then. And I said, "It's my dog." And of course, she said, "It's got to go. It inhibits us too much." And the thought of having to give up the dog, I just couldn't do it. And so out of those feelings of affection for the dog and the marital issues that it raised, came that play.
Was that just one of those flashes of insight? Like, well, if the dog is a young actress, then that will underscore that? Is that one of those moments you can't explain?
I certainly always wanted it to be played by a woman, and a sexy young woman. I just thought that I don't know where that came from, but I can tell you this. I shopped this play around for a year and a half, and most people say, we can't ask a woman to play a dog. And finally, it somehow got to Lynn Meadow, and she said, "I have no problem with that, but let's see if we can get Sarah Jessica Parker interested." And she was. And as you know, in the theater, there's a lot of luck involved. I mean, luck that she was available, luck that Lynn happened to like it that particular day. And opening night, I'm sure you've been through this with a house that seemed extremely quiet. And
no, I've never experienced that. I don't know. That's like I'm sure someday maybe that'll happen.
Well, it might happen. Maybe I hope it does. So we went backstage afterwards. Blythe Danner and Sarah Jessica were both in tears. They said, "Somehow we've lost it. We've ruined your play." But the review was very nice, and the play went on, and
it's beautiful. It's like a really, really moving play.
Well,
it's really lovely.
Thank you. Bill, come here. Come here. Sit.
The world of Buffalo and then your background generally looms so large in your work. So talk a little bit about that. What was that world like for you?
Buffalo, which is kind of a joke today. I mean, you can get a laugh and saying Buffalo, you really can. It was a city that was kind of bypassed by the world, and theater was very much a part of what everybody did. I got into the theater because the theater was all around us. I was in plays, my parents were in the kind of community theater, and they were in clubs, and these clubs would put on plays. We didn't have a major league ball team, but we had a major Broadway-oriented theater called the Erlanger, which all the Broadway plays came through either on the way to or from New York, and we'd go to them. And that red curtain would go up, and I saw Robeson play Othello, and of course Catherine Cornell came from Buffalo, so she used to open her plays there. So that kind of obsessed me, I suppose you could say. And I started writing plays, as I've told you, at an early age. When I got to Williams, Sondheim was 2 classes ahead of me, though he's only 1 year older. And he had taken the college musical and really turned it into something serious with girls. It wasn't just the hairy legs triangle show chorus. He graduated, the mantle fell on my puny shoulders and a couple of others. I took a music course and wrote a couple of songs. I went into the Navy, and I was, because the Korean War was on, and became Special Services Officer on a large aircraft carrier steaming around the Mediterranean. And the captain said, we got to do something about entertaining these boys when we're in port. We can't have everybody go ashore. So I wrote these shows for the Navy. We took the #1 elevator, which lifted the planes up. We lifted up about 5 feet. We had a huge ship's orchestra. So then when I got out of the Navy, I applied to Yale. And I still...
And on your resume, it was like, ship deck, makeshift, 5-foot theater company.
Exactly. All I wanted to do was write musicals. And I wrote the first musical that the drama school had ever done, called Love in Buffalo. I swiped a plot of a play called The Wild Goose Chase from Fletcher of Beaumont and Fletcher, and we did that at Yale, and it was a big hit.
So, playwriting as a discipline that can be taught or learned, what is your experience either being in or teaching or being around playwriting courses or writing workshops?
I think the playwriting courses that I took at Yale, the teacher the first year was a man who had never written a play, and the teacher from the next 2 years, John Gassner, had never written a play, but he was a very good anthologist and critic. But almost because of their inexperience in the practicalities of the theater, we started putting plays on our own. If you can turn that class into an audience, I think you can. I know that's the way I learned, just the practicality of how things played in front of an audience. I mean, there's certain things that many playwrights coming out of these playwriting classes have no conception of, namely, well, first, the fact that the odds are their play is not going to be done if it has more than 6 characters in it. In addition to that, most playwrights don't think about the fact that if you end with a scene with an actress in blue jeans and then you change to her coming on in an evening dress,
right,
you've got to cover the time because she can't get quickly into an evening dress and look good and comb her hair, whatever it is. You've got to think of yourself as much as being an engineer as being an artist.
There was sort of a turning point in your career when you went from, you were teaching at MIT, and then you were able not to teach anymore.
I got a sabbatical, and I had written The Dining Room and sent it on ahead to my agent, and my agent, God love him, said, Pete, I don't think I can place this play. There's no leading character. It seemed to not necessarily connect immediately with each other. So I sent it to Andre Bishop. He said, I've read your play, The Dinner Party. And he said, I like this play. He said, it's very interesting. But he said, you have that birthday party halfway through, which requires 6 little children on stage. And he said, I'm going to have to deal with all those mothers backstage. I said, no, the actors play even the little kids as well as the older people. He said, I don't think that'll work at all. And I said, well, let's try a reading. And we did. And I dug up a director.
So this is a story about how everyone was wrong, but you.
I was the only thing to be had. I wasn't sure I was right.
Right.
I didn't know whether it was any good or not, and it didn't get great reviews.
Mm-hmm.
But people seemed to want. I hit a chord that seemed to echo with audiences, and then ultimately it caught on, and we moved it and went on lots of places.
And then after that, your writing became your sort of full-time.
Yeah. After
gig.
that, then I could justify being in New York.
Theoretically, that's the dream, right? Oh, I can support myself completely with my writing. I don't have to do anything else. But in terms of like the structure of your day or the structure of a season or the structure of a life, is there anything more difficult about, because when I was still a student or when I still had to have a day job, writing felt like something I was secretly getting away with in like the wee hours or in the corners of time. And it's almost, sometimes it almost feels like it's possible to write better that way.
I know exactly what you're saying, and I felt that at certain times. When I was still at MIT teaching, I'd go through this tremendous kind of grinding of gears every June when I didn't have to meet a course for, say, 3 months. The agony of trying to put my head in a different place from just the critical place. I didn't have too much success doing that. When the dining room hit, suddenly it was almost as if a dam burst. And I can do this, I can do that.
But you mean creatively, you suddenly felt, was it just because of the extra time, or what do you think contributed to that sudden
Well, I think
flow,
I didn't feel I'd found a form, because you can only use the dining room for one, but
Right.
I thought I had found a subject, and a subject that was worth exploring in more length, namely the world I had grown up in, the kind of old-fashioned, culture-oriented, restricted world, obsessed with manners and decorum, and how that world was responding to the world which was changing all around it.
Right, to being challenged.
Yeah. So I suddenly said to myself, I can write about how they behave in the summer. I can write about dancing school. I can write about clubs. And that kept me going for quite a while. I had a subject. I mean, you take, for example, John Updike is a great writer, writes beautifully, but he never really has a subject. He knows how to write anything. Whereas Philip Roth has a subject, and his subject is in some ways the same as mine. The clash between a kind of traditional Jewish, Newark-oriented home.
Right, the father who is angry about what the son is writing.
Right.
Yeah.
I like both writers, but I remember with Updike, and I've taught him and everything, I think he's a wonderful, and I've met him a little, he's a wonderful man. But he'll write about anything, and he'll write beautifully about anything, but he doesn't, he pretends he's writing about sex, or he pretends he's writing about religion, but he really isn't. He's writing about what? He's writing about writing. He's writing about how to describe the world, where Roth is not.
Along the spectrum, you have written a lot of plays, and also you do. I guess it's what's more striking is the consistency with which you produce. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, having spent a good deal of my life teaching and having to prepare classes. So when the summer came around, when I really decided I wanted to be a serious writer, I knew I only had, say, 2.5, 3 months to do it. So the clock was ticking away. The sword of Damocles was over my head, because I knew by September 1st I wouldn't be able to write until the following June. So that gave me the impetus to really sit down and just do it. And
so your formative period of learning how to write professionally was always compressed.
Yeah, and that's one thing. The other thing is I had a very specific subject. I mean, the world was changing so rapidly, and the difference between the way I was brought up and the way things were happening, the way my children were behaving, the way what was happening in the world, this cultural contrast and clash seems to me exciting and worth writing about in a number of different areas.
So it just felt like a well you could keep.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had a subject.
Because I think sometimes your work gets pigeonholed as being about that world,
yeah.
when in fact what it's about is challenges to that world,
exactly.
or disruptions to that
You're
world. Otherwise
right.
there would be no plays. You often have a sort of balanced pair in your plays of the person who still believes in that world and wants to remain within it, and the rebel who's outside of it. Your work is full of these very detailed stories and histories and backstories. And how does that process of drawing on your real experience and then infusing it, like how does that process work for you?
I'm not sure I can tell you how that happens.
You have to. That's what this interview is about. Inquiring playwrights.
You have to call on your, and absolutely the hero in Love Letters is very much, parts of his life are very much like mine. And the closest I've come to really drawing on my own family life, I suppose, would be The Cocktail Hour. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I couldn't have written a word of that if my father hadn't already died. And my mother made me promise not to ever have that produced in Buffalo until after she was dead.
The Cocktail Hour is literally a play in which a playwright goes home with a play to ask his family's permission to put on a play about them.
Yeah.
And what we actually end up watching is the argument about whether the play is allowed to happen.
That's right. Right.
Once you begin to draw, or this is an experience I've had, once I begin to draw on true stories from my life or experiences that I've had or that people close to me have had, things aren't necessarily relevant because they're true. So then the question becomes, how do you know which true stories to draw on? Is that again just like you're listening to the play, or?
You got to have a sense of your audience. I mean, who the hell are you talking to with this play? And some things that might be very true and very interesting to you, you can say they won't get that. That wouldn't interest them. Don't go into that excursion. You have to be aware of your audience and what will work with them. Mm-hmm. But for instance, I wrote one autobiographical play called Ancestral Voices. And that was kind of a major trauma in my family when my grandmother, at the age of about 52, ran off with my grandfather's best friend. And when I say ran off, they ran only 20 miles from Buffalo. They couldn't leave Buffalo. And it's what the repercussions it caused in my family, because this was my mother's mother and even her father, her trying to deal with this and raise kids. My father, the repercussions throughout the city because it's my grandfather, it destroyed. Now, it took me a long time to write that, and everybody involved was dead when I wrote it. That liberated me. Mm-hmm. And my father was even tougher on me. I mean, that first play I told you about, Scenes from American Life, he wouldn't speak to me for almost a year because I used four-letter words in that play. And I put the family on stage a little bit. He didn't like that. And when I came to New York and started having plays done, I'd say, look, we were speaking by then. I said, come on down and see. You might like this one. He'd always say, if it's any good, it'll come to Buffalo.
So I guess it's just a case-by-case process of finding a form or a conceit where the craft intervenes between you and the truth.
I think that's perfectly said. I mean, those rules make the people behave less photographically, less. Right. They become part of the play that you're putting on, rather than just sort of transcriptions from reality, because you're anchoring them in a certain shape.
So from within your own extensive oeuvre, among that body of work, do you have favorites?
I really don't. I mean, there's a slick answer I can give you. My plays are like my children. I have no favorites among my children. I can do that, but
my plays are like my children. I've disowned them all.
Yeah, right. Right. There are certain plays that evoke certain things. There's certain plays that I can think of having the best experience in rehearsal with. Certain plays that totally surprised me by how well they did suddenly, in the previews and in reviews. Plays that were nailed, that I didn't think got the right review, that got a raw deal. They are like my children. Some of them are breadwinners.
Right.
Some of them appeal to academia, like Another Antigone, which was kind of killed here, but it's done a lot in schools and colleges. And the play just, I had a hell of a good time doing it.
And then, of course, obviously, you sit at home imagining it being perfect, sitting there on the screen or on the paper, and then you get into the rehearsal room and you have to deal with all of these collaborators and interpreters who can elevate it, but also, there can be all kinds of roadblocks. So what is it, what has your experience been finding the right director, knowing when a director is right for you?
Well, I've been around long enough, so there are about 4 or 5 directors that I normally work with. And we know each other well, we trust each other, we count on each other. You obviously worked with people you're very congenial with.
Yeah.
And I think that's the heart of the matter. But you're so eager to have your play done when you're young that no matter what they say, we'll work that one out later. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, and when you don't, it's agony. But you should try to get all that out of the way by having lunch. Meals always help, right? Breaking bread.
Exactly.
And try to go into the experience with a few questions in mind about what's non-negotiable. I mean, if you really are proud of your ending, and the director says, "No, we got a lot of work to do on the ending," you can begin to wonder whether you're with the right person. But it's hard to say no in the theater in many cases. Here's this theater, it's got a date. I'm talking about regional theaters now, or some kind of off-Broadway production. They've raised the money, whatever it is. And we've got so-and-so to direct it for you. You're going to find yourself agreeing and find yourself in pain sometimes down the line. I know that's happened to you, but it's happened to me.
Sometimes. Sometimes, but I've also been very lucky, and I agree with you. I think that, in a way, it's always worked best for me with directors who are also people that I can consider my friends, who I would want to spend time with anyway.
That's it. It's a little like a marriage without the sex. In some cases, maybe there's the sex.
Just in the writing process generally, what are the most thrilling or fulfilling parts of it? What are the scariest and most daunting parts of it?
First, I think I agree with Wordsworth. It's got to be strong feelings recollected in tranquility. I mean, if you're not writing about something that you feel strongly about, whether it's a dog or a drink, you won't get very far. But the toughest thing for me is, where do you begin? Well begun is half done, as my father used to say. I mean, finding the way to start it off. The most thrilling part is when you get into it and you know that you started in the right place and it begins to tumble for you.
You feel you're running behind the boulder that's rolling down the hill, as opposed to pushing up the hill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Endings are tough, particularly these days, because you don't want to tie every knot. I mean, it looks old-fashioned and artificial if you do. So how do you find a sense of an ending, but still the ambiguity that gives a play kind of weight? The next most terrifying thing when you send it out, whether it's to your agent, your wife, but whoever, or your friend, and their response might be entirely different from, you might be totally enthusiastic about what you've done, but they might not be.
Right.
And it's sort of that gap.
Time to get new friends.
Yeah,
that's
right.
What I say.
It's right. Time to get new. It's that horrible limbo when you don't know what you've done and whether you've been totally deluded. But when it begins to roll and you're there, and the collaborative effort of the theater can be very exciting for me, I think.
Right.
And then those wonderful previews when the audience gives you everything, the early audiences when they're willing to bestow on you a certain kind of generosity which you might not get from the critics. And then the agony of the bad review.
What do you do when you get a bad review?
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I used to get bad reviews a lot, still do many times, but
Sure.
And my response first is to go to bed I just go to bed.
Sleep is a good solution.
Then when I get up, my next step is always like, God bless it. I'm going to prove them wrong. Next time and I always try to have a little bit of an insurance policy when a play is opening, namely another play I'm just beginning to start.
Something else to lean on,
yeah,
like psychologically.
Right,
like,
right.
Well, I've got this other. But you do read them. You do read, because there's a, writers either read them or they don't read them or they claim not to read them.
The good ones I read through. The bad ones in the beginning I only read, shall we run or not?
To know the lay of the land.
And you can tell that from the first paragraph and the last. Later on, I can read them a little bit. But I promise you, I don't want to sound avuncular, but I read them less and less. Mm-hmm. When you're working on a play and you've committed yourself to it, and you've worked hard on it, and you've found the right director, the actors have gotten into it, you become a very committed community. And when in these circumstances today, when there's really only one review that counts, it's like a car that's moving swiftly along down a lovely street, suddenly slamming into a rock or something. Mm-hmm. And I always try to go back and talk to the actors the next day, and they all say, well, you don't read reviews. I say, either do I. But you just sort of have to tell them you're still there, and that the play's still there, and we got to sort of, everybody knows you've got to kind of pull yourself up and go on. They don't make that much difference in the end, because I don't have plays on Broadway are so review dependent. I mean, normally we're slotted in for 4 weeks, 5 weeks in a particular place, so we're running anyway.
Right.
The hell with them.
Right. Who are some of the playwrights that you most admire, the plays that you most responded to?
I always admired Ibsen simply because everything was so beautifully put together. Mm-hmm. Each line moved the story farther along. And Chekhov used to bother me. I adore Chekhov now, but it seemed so diffuse, so casual. People didn't seem to be listening to each other, which they don't always. Right. In Ibsen, they do. Everything is carefully made, at least in the sort of the standard realistic Ibsen plays that are the most popular. I've always been a great fan of Thornton Wilder's Our Town, but I just think the way he sort of embraces the artificiality of the form and makes that work, mm-hmm. and the sort of basic human emotions that he tries to deal with. And that terrific last act when you go back and when a world, doesn't anybody ever appreciate you while you're alive? It moves me every time. Mm-hmm. Well, when I began to teach at MIT, I got very interested in the plays of Jean Anouilh. I loved his artificiality, his wit, and his theatricality, his sense of himself simply as an entertainer, which sometimes I fear I try to be. Mm-hmm. I know it's a major play, but I never was moved by Waiting for Godot. I've taught it many times. It's intellectually very exciting. It's a major milestone in the theater, but so much in the theater to me has to do with what is going to happen next. Mm-hmm. And in Waiting for Godot, there's not much of that. It's all, and that's the point of the play, I think, that nothing's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. If people were asked to describe your work, one of the things they might talk about is its naturalism, which wouldn't be wrong, but we've also talked a lot today about your interest in form and, mm-hmm. and formal conceits, and you're often playing with chronology and then there's sometimes there's the meta-theatrical element. So was it from some of those later interests, the playwrights that you became in, or I guess Thornton Wilder, you talk about Our Town, and that the playfulness with form, was there a particular inspiration for that, or did that just
I think obviously he does that. He does it very seriously. So maybe I picked that up. It's also, I've always been a great movie fan, but the obvious artificiality of the theater is what appeals to me. I mean, a curtain goes up, there's this couch facing front. What is this? What's on this floor? Why is everybody realistically talking in that direction if they don't? And it's the artificiality and how that works and how much fun that can be and how to sort of poke fun at it has always engaged me, because with the theater, it has to be artificial. But you did The Four of Us. You opened that in San Diego, didn't you?
Yeah, at the Globe.
Yeah. Did you have a good experience there?
I did.
Yeah,
they did two. They premiered two of my plays now.
Did you do The Four of Us in the big indoor theater, the Globe Theater?
We did it. We did it on their second stage in the Cassius, I think it's called, which is
nice. Which would go well there, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about your work is it's like good modern music.
Oh, please.
And I think it came out of Mammoth, but your plays are like that. I was taught the obvious artificiality of the theater is what appeals to me, and how that works and how much fun that can be has always engaged me, because the theater has to be artificial.